going on, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. Now that February's over, today we're stopping and ranking all the new releases I saw this month from the worst to the best. So before I begin, let me know which movies you saw in February, which ones you liked the most, which ones you didn't like at all. Let me know so we can discuss. Also, as always, make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my channel out there and growing the community. And if you are new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. As with any of these lists, this is just my opinion, not a definitive ranking, because I know a few of these movies were pretty divisive, and I know we're going to disagree on a few of them. But let's have a civil discussion in the comments if you feel differently about any of these movies than I did. I also obviously couldn't get to every single movie released under the sun each month in a timely manner, so I will address that there are a few January holdovers on this list, and there are some movies released this month I still intend to watch, but I just couldn't get to, so they'll be on March's list instead. Films like The Father, Minari, and The Vigil, for example, which I included on my most anticipated movies of the month. Sorry, but things have been busy lately. And to be fair, it's actually been quite a busy month, as I did still see 31 movies in February. This was quite possibly the busiest February I can recall in quite some time, which I think is in part due to the Oscar rules changing with the pandemic, and we got a few last-minute awards contenders. I will say, some of these will be a little quick, since this is going to be a long video regardless. I did reviews of all these, so these aren't going to be super in-depth. If you want my full reviews of each of these, you can go check those out. But let's not waste any more time, and let's get to the list. In last place is the clear frontrunner for worst movie of the year so far, Music. Now, I said to myself at the beginning of the year that I should try being a little more constructive with movies I really don't like, because when I really don't like a movie, I can be pretty unkind towards it. But I was gonna try to be fair more often, and then this movie came along. This attempt at being some sort of feel-good, inspirational drama may have just been your typical run-of-the-mill bad movie if it wasn't for its most controversial element, which is Sia casting the non-autistic Maddie Ziegler as the autistic title character. And I don't blame Ziegler specifically for this, to be clear. This is more against Sia for making this decision, her direction of Ziegler, her handling of all the backlash she received for it, and then just the constant abhorrent ways in the movie itself in which music is treated, which is nothing but a burden. This is one of the most offensive portrayals of autism on multiple levels here. And on top of that, we're subjected to these bizarre, random music video segments that are supposed to represent music's inner thoughts, but wind up having no connection to the plot whatsoever, making for a totally disjointed narrative, and it leads to easily the most unpleasant movie experience I've had this year so far. Number 30 is Shook. I generally like Shudder's original content, but this isn't one of them. It's a film that tries to be so many movies at once. I described it as mixing the opening of Scream with Phone Booth, Saw, and Searching all thrown in there. But not only could it not pick a lane as far as which of these movies it wanted to be, it also felt very low stakes because the film kept psyching you out. It tried employing these twists and turns which would boil down to, okay, this is a joke, but now it's actually happening, now it's a prank again, but now it's real. And not only is a lot of the tension immediately deflated because nothing felt genuine after a while, but it just became totally incoherent and was easily one of the most confusing movies I've seen this year. Number 29 is A Nightmare Wakes, back-to-back Shudder releases, unfortunately. This tries to be an adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein by showing it through Mary Shelley's life, drawing parallels between her experiences and the actual Frankenstein story. But it's just so unbelievably hokey in the way in which it does so. The major thing that tanks this movie for me is that it feels like an amateur stage version of a period drama. You don't feel transported to this time period. The actors themselves were fine, and there were some creepy visuals here and there, but it almost always felt like you were watching actors and you never saw the characters themselves. And that's the only thing about it that really stuck with me. It was so jarring that that's all I can think about, and not anything from the story. So it just left a bad taste in my mouth. Number 28 is HBO Max's Earwig and the Witch. I really hate to say it, but this is the first Studio Ghibli film that I'd say is really bad. I never thought I'd see this moment. It's not even the CGI animation that I took so much of an issue with, though I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of it, to be honest, and I don't doubt that this at least came from a good place. I'm usually less harsh on a movie I don't like if I at least know it was well-meaning and just missed its mark, but this is just not a completed movie. or at least it doesn't feel that way. It's an hour and 15 minutes or so of Earwig doing random tasks in this house with this witch, with no actual arc or character development whatsoever. And then we finally start to learn a little something about these characters in the last few minutes, and then it gets to this point where you think it's this third act reveal, and it suddenly cuts the credits in one of the most abrupt ways possible. If you didn't know beforehand how abruptly this movie ends, you think maybe your TV glitched out or something. And whatever the intent may have been, it left us with what was essentially a waste of time. There's no other way of saying it. I mean, there have been some Studio Ghibli movies I wasn't crazy about before, but this is unfortunately a major low point for them. Number 27 is Hulu's The United States vs. Billie Holiday. This is another film that I'd say may have been made with some good intentions, but the execution is totally botched here. For one thing, it feels like a bland, low-budget made-for-TV movie. The production value looked noticeably cheap, and it felt like a quickly put-together production that you'd see on cable on a weeknight, not a proper feature-length movie. And on top of that, the film makes so many bizarre narrative choices. It constantly shifts point of view, and it felt very insulting to Holiday's legacy. It boils her entire personality to just being a drug addict, while trying to give a redemption arc to the federal agent who played a part in her downfall, which made no sense to me, and I found that to be incredibly disingenuous. I mean, Andra Day herself was good, but the story itself was not the meaningful tribute to Holiday that it should have been. Number 26 is Bliss, and all I can say is, wow. I had to. Owen Wilson and all. Anyway, this is basically a more melodramatic version of The Matrix. It's a film that deals with living in a simulation, and there are crystals to get you between worlds instead of pills, and all that other good stuff. Now, I'll give this film some credit for at least having some intriguing ideas buried in there. The problem is, for most of the film's runtime, we're not sure what the point's supposed to be. We don't see the other world until like 50 minutes in, and before that, it's just Owen Wilson and Salma Hayek aimlessly wandering around, and the real conflict of the movie isn't presented until like the final 20 minutes or so. So it causes all the information that's actually relevant to the story to add up to, at best, 45 minutes, maybe? And that's being generous. Of all the movies here, this might just be the winner of biggest squandered opportunity. Number 25 is Private Chat. This is another film that presents a story through two different points of view. And unfortunately, it starts off with showing us the point of view of a totally unlikable character. The film is meant to be this insight into loneliness and trying to form a connection, and you have a guy who tries to do that through talking to cam girls online and just make general conversation with them. But what happens is he quickly crosses the line, and what we see him do are things like stalk women and break into their homes and hack into their computers, and this is our protagonist. I just had a hard time getting invested when we saw him do this not once, but repeatedly throughout this movie. It eventually shifts point of view to the camgirl herself, played by Julia Fox, and she was a great character, but this comes so late into the movie that it winds up being too little too late for me, especially due to the fact that it winds up leading to the most uncomfortable ending in a movie I've seen in quite some time. Number 24 is Below Zero, one of January's holdovers from Netflix. This was a mixed bag for me. I really don't have a ton to say about it. It was sporadically entertaining. It's an action thriller that would be pretty solid whenever we did focus on the action, but whenever the film tried going for more character-driven moments, which I do appreciate, they just didn't work. The pacing would slow down incredibly, and what would happen would be the film would go from entertaining to slow, back to entertaining to really slow, and because the pacing was so jarring and it was only entertaining in spurts, it's nothing I really care to revisit. Number 23 is Tom and Jerry. I think I was actually a bit kinder to this movie than most other people because I know this got ripped apart, but I didn't think it was terrible, though I still didn't like it, to be totally clear. I actually thought it worked whenever Tom and Jerry themselves were on screen. I thought, well, it's not them at their best, it still stayed true to who they were to a degree. But the problem was the fact that this took a page right out of similar movies like Yogi Bear, The Smurfs, and all those other Hanna-Barbera adaptations or whatever other cartoons they were adapting into live action. Tom and Jerry themselves ultimately take a back seat to a bunch of human characters who we ultimately don't care about. You have Chloe Grace Moretz as the star here, and she really tries, but there are all these subplots that go in all these different directions, and most of these characters aren't even really all that likable or that funny. And this is just ultimately a dud. Though I would like to see a fully animated feature-length Tom and Jerry movie, because I think that would actually be pretty solid. Number 22 is The Reckoning. I thought Neil Marshall's direction here was pretty solid. I know he has what it takes to make a good horror movie, as I've seen one of his good horror movies, but the substance isn't on the same level as the style here. It's focused on a woman who's accused of being a witch in the 1600s, and it's an hour and 15 minutes of her getting beaten, tortured, assaulted, all while mixed with these moments of her experiencing visions of supernatural beings that wind up having no bearing on the plot. It later goes into revenge thriller territory, and I thought that basically is what saved it from going even lower on this list, but we only get that in like the last 20 to 30 minutes, and it simply wasn't enough. Number 21 is Netflix's Penguin Bloom, another January holdover. And I'd say the next few movies on this list I was a bit mixed on, as opposed to everything lower than this where it was just bad. I know this is one people had a soft spot for, as you have the cute animal here as one of the main characters, and it's meant to be this inspirational story, and there were some solid things about it. Naomi Watts and Andrew Lincoln were both good, and I like some of the interactions with this magpie, and the second half of the movie was pretty nice, but what holds it back for me is that it's filled with a lot of really heavy-handed symbolism. Like, Naomi Watts fell down, and so did the magpie, and their own actions constantly mirrored each other's. Like, it was very on the nose with how it wanted you to feel. And this is on top of the fact that we got a lot of narration that was very explicit in trying to hammer home certain emotions, especially during its incredibly depressing first half. And to me, it was a bit much. I'm usually on board for cute animal stories, but this isn't one I'd find myself revisiting. Number 20 is Malcolm and Marie, and I know I'm going to get some pushback here because this one is one of the most divisive entries on this list. People either thought this was brilliant or they thought it was unbearable. I'm in the middle. I can appreciate what they were trying to do here with this story about deconstructing relationships, and I thought both Zendaya and John David Washington were both great. And the first half hour or so, when they have their first of many arguments, it was really good. But after that first argument, it begins to circle back around to the same few talking points over and over again, just repackaged differently. And it felt like the story was very stagnant, where we'd go around in circles. And that's where it started to lose me, as it felt like there was no longer an arc for these two characters. I felt like this was something that could have been effectively told in about 30 minutes or so, but it felt like this was made specifically with award season in mind, with all these big speeches and every line of dialogue was this long monologue you'd hear in a stage play. And while I thought the delivery by both actors were great, I began to see less of the characters in this intense argument and more the actors just reciting this very overwritten dialogue, and it loses me a bit, but I respect it for what it was trying to do. Number 19 is Willy's Wonderland, probably the most hyped up movie of February, and I can understand why, as it's Nicolas Cage versus evil birthday party animatronics. Sounds fun, and whenever it is focused on Cage just beating the crap out of these things, it was great. The film had a couple of noticeable problems though, including taking way too long to get to that action, making Cage silent, as well as the pretty terrible acting by almost everyone else in the cast. Like, the delivery of a lot of these lines was pretty cringeworthy to me. I mean, I know this isn't a movie you go to for the acting, but if you're going to wait until 45 minutes before getting to what everyone actually came to the movie for, you got to at least make the acting tolerable, and that unfortunately wasn't the case here. Now still, if you're in the mood for a decent B-movie, this gives you just enough of the comically violent thrills you were looking for. It just could have been better. Number 18 is All My Friends Are Dead, another Netflix release, and I had some fun with this. I described it as if American Pie turned into a bumbling Coen Brothers comedy mixed with the off-the-wall action of John Wick. It's this big New Year's Eve party that winds up going horribly wrong, and it's a pretty straightforward movie. There are a lot of solid moments of dark humor here, but there are also some glaring issues with it. One, the movie's told in flashback, and in the opening scene, you find out everyone's fates right then and there. Like, you'll see exactly where everyone winds up by the end of the movie. So a lot of that tension is immediately gone. And two, during the first half, before the chaos really breaks out, we're spending all this time with these characters, and a few of them, if not most of them, are pretty obnoxious, and their scenes aren't always enjoyable. And considering we know what ultimately happens to them in the end, we end up really not caring what sort of side plots there are. But still, this does a decent enough job of giving us some nice, mindless entertainment. Number 17 is Lapsus. Now, what is Lapsus, you may ask? This probably had the quietest release of everything on here. It's a minimalistic sci-fi satire about a guy who has to run cables through the woods for this Amazon/Google-like company, and he discovers this giant conspiracy about them. There were a lot of things this movie did right, like it takes a lot of swipes at big tech companies, and it had a lot of great dialogue and likable characters. It has a very anti-corporate message, which I appreciated, but what held it back for me though is that it also leaves a few plot elements a bit too vague. Like, you never fully get what's going on with this company that's supposed to be this big villain. You know there's a conspiracy, but you'll never have your head fully wrapped around it, and it causes the movie to end on not as strong of a note as it began. I think its messaging is pretty solid though, so you may enjoy this one. Number 16 is Disney's Flora and Ulysses, and anything from here on I thought was at least good, and I'd say is definitely worth checking out. I didn't really think I'd end up liking this one as much as I did, but I found it to be pretty sweet for what it was. The film has a very goofy, sometimes awkward sense of humor where it tries throwing a lot of jokes at you, and they don't always work, but I think what really made this work for me was the film's overall sincerity. It's definitely oriented more towards kids, but there's a nice message in there about having hope and optimism at times where you think that wouldn't be possible, all done through this fantasy element of a superhero squirrel. It has a great cast, in particular newcomer Matilda Lawler as a protagonist, and it has a big heart that made it an enjoyable watch. Number 15 is To All the Boys, Always and Forever, the final film in Netflix's To All the Boys trilogy. I thought this was a nice step back in the right direction for these films, as I was pretty disappointed with the second movie. I still think this doesn't hit the same heights as the first movie did, but I found it to be a really sweet way to end the trilogy. Like the other two films, all the conflict really boils down to our main character, Lara Jean, having to make a choice, but this time, instead of simply choosing who she's in love with, it's a choice about where to go to school, which will really affect her entire future. And I thought the film did a good job of making the conflict feel pretty high stakes without getting into melodramatic territory, which is what I felt the second film did. The only thing is, this relies heavily on you already liking these characters from the other two movies, as there isn't so much of an arc here where the characters are totally changed by the end of the movie. So it's by no means one of the most complex stories around. But still, if you like the first two movies, or at the very least just the first movie, I think you'll find this to be a fitting end to the trilogy. Number 14 is Red Dot. This is a Netflix action thriller about a couple who are being chased through the snowy mountains while on what was meant to be a romantic getaway. And it's a pretty grim thriller. I wouldn't call it feel good at all, and while I think it's solid enough that it's definitely worth watching, because of the direction it goes several times, it's also not a film you'll find yourself wanting to revisit anytime soon. But still, it did a great job of conveying suspense and bringing us excitement, making for a competently made action thriller. Number 13 is Finding Ohana. This was another Netflix film from January that I missed, and it's pretty much their take on the Goonies, mixed with a little Indiana Jones. You have a group of kids and young adults who find this treasure map that may have some connections to their family history, and the sense of adventure this movie had was a lot of fun, especially once we get to the second half where it's almost strictly focused on the treasure hunt. Now, there's definitely a kid-oriented feel throughout it. It has elements I felt I would have seen in family comedies from the early 2000s, but it's still something I think all audiences will be able to enjoy. There's a nice message in there about family, there was a number of solid laughs, and some exciting moments of action-packed thrills that made for a pretty enjoyable watch. Number 12 is Fear of Rain. This seems to be another one people are mostly split on. I thought it was pretty good, but I do know a number of people who didn't particularly care for it. And I get where that criticism stems from, because it's basically a Rear Window type movie about a girl who thinks her neighbor has a child kidnapped in her house. It's just instead of being bound to a wheelchair like in Rear Window, our main character has schizophrenia. And I thought the film did a good job of tastefully handling the character's mental illness without using it in this very exploitative manner. Part of the film does involve her questioning if things around her are real or not, which is a tired trope, but I like the way in which this was executed. I'd say part of it's due to the writing, but it's also because of the performances. I thought Madison Iseman did an excellent job here. I feel, whatever your thoughts on the movie itself are, this is pretty indicative that she's going to be pretty big within at least the next few years, and all she needs is the right project to sign on to. So I'm looking forward to whatever's coming next for her. Number 11 is Supernova, which got a theatrical release in January, but I caught it when it hit VOD in February. I thought this was a really sweet film that beautifully handled the subject of dementia, which a number of films between this year and last year are doing, coincidentally. It's a very restrained movie. Like, this isn't a film based around one central conflict, and there aren't these huge emotional boiling points, because part of it is that Stanley Tucci's character, Tusker, has pretty much accepted his situation, and it's now just about how he and his partner, played by Colin Firth, are dealing with it. It's not like there's this one specific event or anything that they're trying to overcome. So if you don't like these quieter character studies, this may not be for you, and I get it, but I thought both Tucci and Firth did fantastic jobs here. Their performances alone make this movie, and I'd say it's worth checking out. At number 10 is Wrong Turn, or Wrong Turn the Foundation, depending on where you live. With this being a reboot of the slasher series, there were people who thought this was absolutely terrible and the worst of the series, and then there were also people who thought this was the breath of fresh air that the Wrong Turn series needed. I'm in that latter camp. I just did a whole review series on all 7 movies and ranked them, so I'll keep this short. But while it's by no means a perfect movie, I found it to be pretty creepy, and I liked how it went from a focus on cannibals to this eerie cult. It gave the film more opportunities as to what to do as far as pitting the protagonists against the villains, and I thought it was really well acted. It has its noticeable highs and its noticeable lows, but I ultimately enjoyed the direction it took, and it ended on a really satisfying note, so it was fine in my book. Number 9 is The Queen of Black Magic, another January release, and so far the only Shudder release we've gotten this year that I really enjoyed. This is a mix of a character study with an atmosphere-driven haunted house thriller. And it has a little bit of this B-movie vibe to it, as you have a lot of these eerie images of all these horrifying creatures messing with our main characters. They hallucinate these frightening things, and they get possessed to attack one another, and it's pretty entertaining, I gotta say. Now, I think it could have done a little better on some of the character stuff, as we have a lot of people who we're focusing on here, and their arcs could have been fine-tuned, but if you're in the mood for a good old-fashioned haunted house movie, this brings all the chills and thrills you're looking for. At number 8 is The Map of Tiny Perfect Things, which is another time loop movie in the vein of Groundhog Day. And before you say, not another one of these, just hold up, as you might be pleasantly surprised. Now, it's by no means the best of these sort of movies. It's not on the same level as, say, Edge of Tomorrow or Palm Springs, but it's still a very sweet, funny movie with 2 solid performances from Kyle Allen and Kathryn Newton. And it centers a little more on the notion about trying to make the most out of your time and be a better person and how you can appreciate each day. And while the movie still involves character development, it spares you how they're initially unlikable jerks at first, and then we get a montage of them trying to kill themselves and all the usual jokes. It's more to the point, and for that, I appreciate this. Number 7 is Palmer, and this is the last January movie on this list I have to talk about. This is another film that by no means subverts genre tropes or anything, and it may feel pretty familiar in many regards, but emotionally, it hits all the right notes, and that's thanks to a great lead performance by Justin Timberlake. This is probably the best performance I've seen from him in quite some time, and I really think he carries this. But another big standout is Ryder Allen, as the young neighbor Palmer has to take care of, and Palmer becomes this father figure towards him. The one thing it didn't do that I appreciated is that it doesn't make them so combative right from the start, and has them work well together for pretty much right from the beginning. And it leads to a very sweet, character-driven film that will have you smiling by the end. Number 6 is Space Sweepers, South Korea's major space blockbuster that was sold to Netflix and premiered early in the month. I thought this was an absolute blast. This, and the next movie on this list actually, is just pure fun. It introduces us to this intriguing world that we can explore for countless movies, I feel like. And we get characters like robots, space pirates, androids carrying bombs, space gangs, and we get to watch them all duke it out in these exhilarating action scenes that are filmed beautifully. Like, this is a movie I wish I could have seen on the big screen, to be quite honest. And what's great is, it gives us all this while still not sacrificing well-written characters. I mean, I wouldn't call this specifically a character-driven movie, but they all had really solid arcs that I enjoyed, and the banter among all of them was really funny. If we were to get a sequel to this, I'd be totally on board. It has the right mix of heart, humor, thrills, and action to make for an enjoyable time. Number 5 is Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. Basically, this is an extended SNL skit that somehow manages to not lose steam. It's just joke after joke of some of the goofiest, dumbest things said and done, and I loved just about every minute of it. I mean, does every single thing said and done work? Of course not. And maybe this will be so ridiculous for you that it will be way too much. And that's basically where the criticism is going to boil down. But for me, a lot of the jokes landed well. I thought Kristen Wiig and Annie Mumolo did a phenomenal job together. Jamie Dornan was excellent. And overall, it's just a really good time. Number 4 is Nomadland. While this one's been crushing it throughout award season, and if you ask me, I think this will wind up coming home with the Best Picture at the Oscars, I can see how this movie's not going to be for everyone. If you don't like slower movies, this definitely won't be for you. And at times, yeah, the pacing is a little off for me. But I found this to be an absolutely beautiful film from start to finish. And it's a film that I think resonates even more now due to the pandemic, and with so many people still out of work and trying to make ends meet like we see here. But the film isn't necessarily about one one specific struggle. What this film is ultimately about is a look at our relationships, what we value, how we are with friends and our loved ones, and the journeys we take. It's all done in a very restrained sort of manner, but it still manages to hit all the right notes, and it's elevated by an excellent performance from Frances McDormand, who gives some of her best work here. I really respect what this film had to say, and I'm sure this isn't the last we'll hear about it this year. Number 3 is I Care a Lot, which I had some really high hopes for, and I was really happy to see it delivered. Though you have to kind of get past the fact that it's focused on some pretty unlikable people. While I thought Rosamund Pike's performance was solid, the film's told through her character's point of view, and she does one terrible thing after another. If anything, I felt more empathy for Peter Dinklage's character, and he's supposed to be more of the antagonist. But if you're able to get past a lot of the terrible things done here, it's actually a lot of fun watching these two go at it. Each situation just built upon the last so well, and it hit all the right notes in building up its tension, and there were some nice moments of dark comedy that I certainly appreciated. I just hope it's one of those films that people don't take the wrong lessons from. Like, the film doesn't condone our main character's behavior, so to speak, and it's very satirical in nature, and there have been movies before that have attempted to do the same thing, but they wind up having the opposite effect on some people, so hopefully that's not the case here. In second place is Judas and the Black Messiah. This is another film where I do kind of have an issue with whose point of view it's presented from, where the action's presented from the perspective of an informant, Lakeith Stanfield's character. And he was very, very good here, don't get me wrong. I thought the performance was on point. I would have rather just liked to have seen a Fred Hampton movie from Fred Hampton's point of view. But at the very least, I was very happy with the way they portrayed Hampton himself, even though this really isn't his movie. I thought Daniel Kaluuya was absolutely phenomenal here, though. No matter what else you think of the film, his performance is absolutely incredible. And once you get past a couple of storytelling issues like the ones I mentioned, once you really get into it, it is a very engaging film, working as one part historical drama and one part thriller. And I felt in the second half especially, the way in which the tension built up so uncomfortably was excellent. I would like to see a more in-depth film about Hampton at some point, but this is a good stepping stone for that. But in first place is Saint Maud, one of the many, many movies to keep getting delayed and delayed before the studio was just like, screw it, and gave it a quick release on Epix of all channels for some reason. At least in the US. I know it got a proper release everywhere else in the fall. But the film wound up not being what I expected it to be, but in the best ways possible. I was expecting this grand scale horror movie for some reason, but it's actually more of a personal film, showing the contrast between these two individuals with wildly opposite values, and what happens when one of them goes too far. It's another film where the focus is on a morally complex individual, Morfydd Clark Maud, and I thought the way in which the film kept messing with us as far as what's going on with her through her narration was brilliantly done. It's a slow burn, but it's one that constantly keeps you on your toes, asking all the right questions. I thought this was a phenomenal debut from writer-director Rose Glass. It's one of the better A24 horror movies I've seen, and it was certainly worth the wait. And that's part of why it's my #1 movie of February. What a month. With the amount of releases we got, it almost felt like this was December Part 2, given we got some awards contenders dropping here. It was honestly one of the better Februaries we've gotten in quite some time. March looks like there won't be as many bigger films, but I'm looking forward to seeing what's in store. As I said, I still plan on checking out movies like The Vigil, Minari, The Father. I heard Little Fish is supposed to be very good, so I plan to include those and a few others in my March list for sure. So stay tuned for all that and much more coming soon. Let me know though, what's your favorite February movie and what's your least favorite? Was it something I listed here? Was it anything I left off? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it. And for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.